During the long, and let me tell you, long preparation of Thesis, because today we're going to be discussing the psychology of dress, a lot of people said, don't be nervous, just picture everyone like they're in their underwear. Wait a second, okay. Although this is a humorous statement, there's definitely some underlying depth to this. So why do we as humans become vulnerable when our bodies are exposed? And why do we as humans have a natural inclination to cover ourselves? The distinguishing features between males and females have become a hot topic in today's media, leading to dress, something that is so vital, to be a controversial subject. Modesty has taken a turn, and when someone addresses a woman about her outfit, it's received with offense. In November of 2017, Olympic gymnast Alexandra Reisman spoke up after sports doctor Larry Nassar was convicted of sexual assault towards 265 people. Over 150 of these victims spoke up in a court hearing in January of 2018. Reisman posted to Twitter what we know as women empowerment, stating that, when summarized, no matter what a woman wears, it should not discredit her when she discloses claims about her sexual assault or harassment. Her teammate in the past 2 games, we know her as Gabby Douglas, responded to this, saying, quote, "However, it is our responsibility as women to dress modestly and be classy. Dressing in a provocative or sexual way entices the wrong crowd," end quote. Although her words were minimal regarding the subject matter, she was bashed and shamed for this quote. She was then accused of contradiction towards Reisman's call to action. She then took that down and responded, saying, "Please hear my heart." She also stated that no matter what a woman wears, it should not discredit her when someone comes out about their sexual assault. She also, at this time, was assaulted by Nassar, but chose not to disclose claims against him. Now that you have that in mind, we'll shift gears. Historians, psychologists, theologians, and even the Bible itself have all asserted that we have value and worth as human beings. Therapist Donna Hicks discusses dignity as something that is not earned, but is maintained or upkept by a man or a woman. She says that it is simply inborn, it's simply God-given, it's natural, contrary to that of respect, which can be lost or gained by an outside party. Honor is fundamentally the public recognition of one's social standing. Theologian Halvor Moxney says that there are 2 types of honor, ascribed and acquired. Firstly, ascribed honor is inherited from a family at birth, and the individual can assume the general level of honor that that family possesses. Contrary to this is acquired honor, and this is the recognition from significant others in society. After studying the 2 sources of self-worth, I see that dignity is parallel to that of ascribed honor, and respect is parallel to that of acquired honor. At this point, I would like to assert that there is a psychological aspect to clothing. Modesty is not limited to clothing, however, but can also encompass mannerisms and behaviors. As boring as it may be, the Oxford Dictionary defines modesty as a behavior, manner, or appearance intended to avoid impropriety or indecency. Now we look in the beginning of the Bible in Genesis, and we see Adam and Eve as just another biblical story. However, they perfectly display dignity as it relates to modesty. Adam and Eve were the only 2 people to know a flawless earth, and then in Genesis 3:7 it says, quote, "Then the eyes of them were both opened, and they realized they were naked. So they sewed fig leaves together and made coverings for themselves," end quote. But let's take a minute and examine this text. Why were they immediately ashamed when their bodies became exposed? They were the only 2 people on the earth, right? And they were technically married. Before they had sinned, they had never internalized these wicked desires, and it took an external source, the devil or the serpent, to cause them to sin. After they had sinned, they hid from their maker, whom before they had a perfect relationship with. Before they were sinned, they were adorned with impeccable glory, but after they had sinned, this was stripped from them. Thus, a garment had to replace that. Here we see the God of Christianity's emphasis on how much he wants us to cover ourselves. Although it is not directly stated, it is implied that an animal sacrifice, or the first ever killing in the Bible, was made to obtain skin to cover Adam and Eve. Now that we've seen just the basis of Christian modesty, I want to look at how Islam addresses it. Doctor of Sociology Asifa Siraj in her piece says that Quran chapter 24 verses 30 through 31, when summarized, address modesty towards males and females. Men, she says, should not cast their gaze, therefore protecting their purity. However, women should not display this beauty and should be veiled or wearing a hijab at all times except in front of their husbands, fathers, or husbands' fathers. Muslims in general believe that the sexes should be segregated and that if a female enters a male space, this can cause disruption or social destruction. A woman should only enter a male's space if it is for an emergency or for his needs. This is a religious practice of modesty, yes. I would argue, however, that it is one of the deepest forms of objectification. Clothing and the way that one presents themselves is very important and is why we're here today. However, if we don't look past that, this limits a woman to her outside appearance and not her values, her beliefs, and her motives. Not only does this objectify her, but this justifies male rape, and Siraj proves this in her piece when saying men, quote, interestingly are the weaker sex, given their inability to control their sexual urge, end quote. Here we have touched on two religious practices and how they address modesty. Here I would like to look at how Aristotle addresses this. In his books Physics and Metaphysics, Aristotle addresses his four causes. The first, material; second, the formal; third, efficient; and the fourth, the final cause. Now, since we're talking about the psychology of dress, I'd like to take these four causes, synthesize them step by step, and look into an outfit or a garment. So first, the material cause. What is the outfit made of? Typically fabric or design or piece of garment. Second is the formal cause and the purpose. Is the purpose of the garment to cover a sexual body part? Most oftentimes, yes. I would argue, however, that some garments are not actually made to cover. For example, the bride's veil. She doesn't wear the veil because she's ashamed or embarrassed, but for tradition and respect. When she takes this off, again, she's not embarrassed or ashamed, but it glorifies her and her husband. The third cause, the efficient cause, bypasses function and asks for the long-term purpose. When you wear an outfit, is the long-term purpose sensual? If so, I would question the person wearing that and ask their motives. Sexually provocative attire and behavior is what modesty culture aims to prevent. From a Christian standpoint, we ask, why is the skin covered? In 1 Timothy chapter 2, verses 9 and 10, it says, quote, in like manner also, that the women adorn themselves with modest apparel, with propriety and moderation, not with braided hair or pearls or costly clothing, but which is proper for women, professing godliness with good works, end quote. Here, let's look back at that Oxford Dictionary with propriety and moderation, decency. Because this is contextual, God's not necessarily saying that it's a sin for us to braid our hair or wear jewels or pearls, but we shouldn't get our worth from that. And this is what the women at this time were doing, is they would validate themselves from others thinking that they were rich or wealthy. From a Christian standpoint, we conceal our bodies to reveal the glory of God. We're not ashamed of our bodies, but we recognize the beauty in them and know what that can do. After studying, we see that not only does provocative dress attract harmful eyes, but it also damages an individual's psyche. Dress researchers in the 1990s did a study showing that clothing is linked to sexual harassment. They compared a model in two outfits, first provocative and second non-provocative. They noted that skimpy, see-through, short items of dress or heavy uses of makeup were cues that were used to assign the victim blame for their assault. Now, you may listen to this study and think that it is completely controversial, and I completely understand. However, I'd like to note that the study used the word provoke rather than advocates for her assault. The very definition of provoke is to stimulate or to give rise to in someone, typically an unwelcome one. So if we go by this definition, we notice that provocative clothing provokes an unwelcome attention from others. Now, when we talk about the four causes, we cannot forget the last one because it flawlessly concludes the last three and asks, who is this outfit for? Objectification theory by Fredrickson and Roberts in 1997 said that women in Western cultures are oftentimes portrayed as objects in the eyes of others, ultimately leading to self-objectification, in which women begin to agree with this mindset that tells them to be based off of societal standards of attractiveness and beauty. And this is why I urge ladies to dress for their own dignity and consider who this outfit is trying to attract. Today we're going to be talking about modesty and how it relates to dignity. Modesty is a broad topic with many interpretations and will be discussed on the level of mannerisms, behaviors, but focus mainly on women's dress. Modest dress will then be linked with sexual assault and objectification in this way. Dignity and self-worth need to be recognized to have modesty, and we need a modest culture to revalue sex. And once we do this, we should see a decrease of objectification and rape culture. Now, there are predominantly two ways of thinking of dress and dress codes. Firstly, I'd like to talk about the feminist movement. They say, if our bodies are beautiful like you say they are, why can't we display them? I would agree, bodies in themselves are beautiful, and if that fallback in Genesis 3 never happened, our bodies would not be considered shameful or embarrassing. With endless free the nipple and the advocating for nudity, modesty is certainly not the first thing that comes to my mind. Another one that I've heard is, I don't have to be modest or dress a certain way to be respected, and it shouldn't work like that anyway. This should just as well be true, but doesn't account for sinful nature, the lust of the eyes and flesh, and reality. Referring back to Aristotle, he says or implies that everything has a purpose or a time. This also applies to dress. This has a purpose and a time, so if something is modest in one culture, it is distasteful in others. Now, I stand here in a business casual outfit because you probably wouldn't respect me in what I wear to bed. Shifting to the second thought, it edges a little bit on legalism. Because of lots of religious wear, such as the hijab, I understand that modesty may be a very touchy subject. When people think modesty, they automatically allude to their 87-year-old grandmother. Now, your grandma may be really cute like mine, but you probably don't want to share a closet with her, and I don't blame you. When considering what to wear, one might ask how something fits, whether it is loose, form-fitting, long, or short. Similarly, when we choose an outfit, we should ask in a cultural context, does that outfit fit? Does the person wearing that outfit, are there values and beliefs displayed in that outfit? Although a suit may be modest at work, I would argue that it's not modest at the beach. However, even in cultural aspects, modesty should not be limited to a dress code. I argue this because someone can be dressed head to toe but can still act in an immodest manner. This is why we need to be cognizant of our self-worth and question our motives when we choose an outfit. You need to recognize that you are a valued human being, so we don't want to treat our body poorly. Beginning this thesis process, I definitely had in my mind the very definition of what modesty was. When meeting with my advisor, she said, "Why do we have to hear this thesis, and what do you have to contribute?" During my research, I learned that humans are naturally inclined to cover the body, and this is not by an underlying insecurity, but it is an instinctive means to protect ourselves not only physically, but psychologically as well. Going back to that old saying, if you're nervous, just picture everyone like they're in their underwear. But why do we do this? The truth is that when we are exposed, our bodies become vulnerable, and if you're vulnerable, I'm in power, and we don't want to give others power. Political commentator Ben Shapiro says that, quote, "If we want to fight rape culture, we have to reinvest sex so that it is more than a physical transaction," end quote. He says that teaching men not to rape is not necessarily the problem. Quote, "If you have to teach your child that, my guess is you've got a much bigger problem than that on your hands. What my dad taught me was to be a gentleman and treat women with respect," end quote. This quote, "be a gentleman and treat women with respect," is what I believe is a large part of men's role in modesty. We need to tell men to advocate for the protection of themselves and for women. A study done by Heather Rupp and Kim Wallen proved that men are more prone to visual stimulus than women are. And this is why I believe that men's clothing is not such a hot topic when we discuss modesty. I don't believe that teaching men not to rape should overpower teaching women modesty, but these two need to be taught in correlation. The result of teaching these two is first telling girls that you are so much more than what your body says about you and what others have to say about it. And when we teach girls this, then they should want to be modest and not want to portray their body negatively towards society or for themselves. Then men should take responsibility of themselves, their actions, and others, and want to be a gentleman to both themselves and others. When both sexes recognize the humanity in people, we should not want to treat others as objects. When women are no longer seen as objects, we should see a decrease in rape culture. However, I would also argue that modesty is not to help rapists out with their lust problem, but rather the average man. Caroline Heldman defines sexual objectification as the process of representing or treating a person like a sex object, one that serves another sexual pleasure. She said that in the 60s and 70s, a lot of people wanted to talk about it, but after that, no one really did. Another thing that is blatantly misconstrued by society is that women are empowered when their bodies are exposed. A woman in Heldman's study said that, quote, "I'm in control if a guy is looking at me. He's giving me attention and that gives me power over him," end quote. However, this is not logically empowering and is actually contradictory in what is hurting the feminist movement. What is society advocating for, the objectification or the respect for women? What about sex sells? I hope you would agree. If advertisements are supposed to attract our attention, then naturally a sexually provocative advertisement will do the trick. If first a woman's body was diminished to sell a product, then why must we now treat her as a valid member of society? Again, I'm not saying this is okay, I'm just saying this is the harm that is done by sexual objectification. After exploring self-worth, dignity, and dress, we see that they all tie together and connect. Therapist Donna Hicks and theologian Halvor Moxney say that dignity is not given by others, but this is respect. We are there to maintain our own dignity, but also to maintain the respect that others need to give us. Although it may be hard to follow just one way of modesty, the majority of people will gravitate towards the meaning of their religious practices and how they address the subject. After we've seen many religious views, I would argue that the Islamic practice can even be seen as objectification. When a woman chooses not to veil herself, does this justify sexual assault towards her? I would hope not. This teaches her that she is less than a man and that a man chooses her actions for her. This is why I say that modesty is not a dress code and cannot be or should not be against someone's will. We should instill dignity in someone instead of teaching them to dress on the outside for others. This is when we see that the Christian God asks for modesty, but he also asks for the heart and for our motives. After researching visual stimulus, the rise in rape culture, and the increase of objectification of female bodies, we have to ask, how is this still acceptable in modern media? But I understand, it seems easy, just throw on an outfit and don't really think of what it says. But this teaches young individuals not the truth. This is the lie that we teach young children. However, we do need to take responsibility for our actions, for what we're wearing and for what we say and how we act. The second topic that we talked about today was a little bit of legalism. And this is why we need to present an attainable ideal for women. And men need to take action and not see women as objects that are to be covered, but to be glorified women that are covered with the glory of God as well. The middle ground of these two interpretations that we discussed lies in the dignity of a person. If a woman is dressing for the satisfaction of others, whether it is to be proved as sexy or as modest, what ownership does she have of her own body? This is why she needs to recognize the beauty that she holds, and so she wouldn't want to dress in a way that negatively portrays her views, her values, and especially her body. Modesty can be a touchy, a brittle, and even a controversial subject, but 1 Samuel 16:7 concludes it better than I can. It says, "But the Lord said to Samuel, 'Do not look at his appearance or his physical stature, because I have refused him. For the Lord does not see as man sees. For man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart.' My God, the God of hope, the God of peace, and the God of forgiveness cares so much of what my heart looks like, but he still asks us to dress in a way that glorifies him. Through his faithfulness, obeying this commandment is the least that we as men and women can do." Thank you.